whirlwind tour of the culture and the cancel culture of these last 3 years.
Yeah, so I'm Simon. So my surname is Goddek in English, Goddek in Dutch, and whatever in other languages. Here in Brazil, they say Goddek or something like this. And my story is kind of, I would say, special. Nowadays, I would say special. Because before COVID started, I was just like a random scientist. I was pursuing a scientific career. I had many citations for my young age. So when COVID hit, I was 34. And yeah, I had like 400, 500 citations per year, which is remarkable. I want to become a full-time professor in biotechnology. I wanted to continue working in academia. But then, I was in Brazil. I'm visiting my girlfriend back then, and they were telling, in Europe they're saying there's a dangerous virus out there, and it's spreading all over the world, and everybody was panicking. No, the only thing I was saying, let's buy rice. so I was telling my mother-in-law to buy lots of rice just in case. You never know what's happening, because I saw the panicking in Europe. So I was like telling her, don't worry about masks, don't worry about anything, just buy food. So this was the situation. Then I was getting back to the Netherlands because I had to work at the university, and things were going crazy there. So they put like lockdowns. We weren't allowed to get out after 8 p.m. And many other weird situations. And they came up with measures that didn't make any sense to me, because my background is system dynamics, system thinking, and I was working a lot on metabolism, on our metabolism. So to understand what's happening within our body. That was prior to 2016 when I started doing research on that. And I was wondering, why aren't they saying that we should eat healthy food? Why aren't they promoting to go out to the sun to get vitamin D? Why were they closing all the sports clubs? And that was when I was like, okay, this is weird. And I thought maybe it's just like a medial thing. It's just panic. They don't think rationally. And I was like, okay, I'm going to contribute to this. I'm going to write down my knowledge on vitamin D, because I saw like on social media, some people were like promoting vitamin D, but they forgot to promote vitamin K2, which is essential. So I was writing a publication about this and explaining why it's necessary, why magnesium is necessary, what's the metabolic pathway of vitamin D and K2, etc. So this is what I did, and I think it got published in September 2020, and that's when it started. So that's when it started to get down the hill. My university back then in Wageningen in the Netherlands received emails that I'm spreading pseudoscience. Yeah, exactly. This is one of the. This is a graphic I made, a causal loop diagram in my publication. Yeah, so the publisher, even it's a high-ranked journal. They got emails that I'd be selling vitamin D pills, and that I had conflict of interest, which wasn't back then the case. I mean, I'm selling them since March this year, but it's a different story. But back then, I never had an intention to sell anything. I just wanted to educate people. And my university, they backed me, but they were already like, okay, it's weird. And yeah, they were like not amused by getting that much fan mail. But I was just like trying to stay below the radar, because I saw on social media that many scientists got silenced already. And I didn't see the need back then to just like fight, like lose my career for vitamin D. This changed, however, when I figured out, or when I was told by a neighbor in the Netherlands, that the preview process of Drosten's PCR protocol just took. He said back then it took 2 days. So I was diving into this because back then I was an editor of a journal, associate editor. And I was diving into the process, and I figured out, okay, it wasn't 2 days, it was like 3.5 hours until maximum 27.5 hours that this peer process could have taken place. And I was, of course, trying to understand how this is possible, and I was diving into here we go, diving into the journal itself. I figured out that Drosten was Drosten himself was an editor on the editorial board of this journal, where he published his publication. And it was, I think, in January 2021 that I wrote this thread on Twitter. And I had 20, 30 followers, maybe max back then. So I had like a very small account. Nobody noticed me. I like that. And suddenly I had thousands of followers overnight who were asking questions, who were like shocked. And I was like, okay, what did I do? What did I do? And as you can see also on my Substack post that you just linked, I got attacked heavily just that day, heavily by virologists from Erasmus University of Utrecht. I tried to find back their tweets these days, and I couldn't find them anymore. I think they deleted them, but they attacked me heavily, and they contacted my university back then. They told me that I was attacking Myron Koopmans and Drosten, who were like world-class scientists, and that I'm spreading pseudoscience. All the slandering was going on, and I got into trouble. So I had to talk to the dean of my faculty. I explained to him everything. He said they backed me. They did officially, but behind the scenes, they got rid of me eventually in March.
Really?
Yeah. So
March of which year?
2021, just like two months after I spoke out. Yeah. I was told they want to have another person who's less critical. I was like, I'm a scientist. Isn't this my job to be critical?
Yeah. You actually, where do I have it? You have this nice graph on science versus pseudoscience. I'll have to. You can keep. Here it is.
I met this graph after I got fired, or, legally speaking, I wasn't fired. I got the funding was running out, and I got follow-up funding. So I got follow-up funding myself for the university. I wrote an application in my free time. I got the money. I got the 3 million euros, I think it was. And they just said, like, thank you for the money, we take someone else, which is much worse than just.
So that money went to the university?
Yes.
Right. You had solicited, and it had been awarded based on your
application, which I wrote for myself for more than 90% by myself.
Okay.
Yes.
So you were good as long as you were attractive and so forth. But as soon as the money came, they didn't really have much more use of continuing you, although you theoretically could have gotten other grants and whatnot. But they were satisfied for the moment, and enough so that they could part with you without any damage to the oncoming grant.
Yeah, they just took the money and took someone else, which is immoral, unethical. Never happened before. But yeah, that's what they did. And of course, I don't have this in a written form. I just have it like they called me, or someone of the professor I like, that he called me and they said, like, we made a decision, or like the majority is against having you here anymore, without providing any reason. It's just because of what I said online. And back then, my opinion, what I said online, I wasn't even speaking my mind. I was self-censoring me to 95%. So keep this in mind. And they even got rid of me. But it's like the Vocus University problem in the Netherlands. Totally Agenda 2030. It's like the most sustainable university in the world. Nothing against sustainability. I think sustainability is important to some degree.
So I don't want to get too diverted here, but does this Agenda 2030, is that having to do with like making, say, Europe's most productive farms go back to the 17th century? Is that? Yeah. I mean, regarding this, I kind of agree with them, because I think
the farming practice these days isn't as it should be, because it really hurts biodiversity. It's really not as efficient because all the nutrients in the soil are disappearing. This whole degradation is like quite high. So I love permaculture, and I think a permaculture approach also works on big scale. But this is another discussion. And but what's happening in the Netherlands, of course, outrageous. It's the most productive country like in the world regarding what they can produce per hectare. Mm-hmm. And they were already going the right way. They were already reducing their nitrate leachate, etc. But they just try to cut it even more, and they don't give the farmers another chance to
right. So I do
change.
think there's a theme there, which is we have the power. Shut up.
Mm. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah. I would have to go very deep inside that rabbit hole that they try to orchestrate a food crisis. But I have no clue what their ultimate goal is here. But this is just plain wrong. What they're doing with the farmers, taking away their livelihood, just based on nitrate.
Right. So let's retrack back to your story. I don't want to divert too long on that one, but it's interesting. So where did that? You pointed out kind of the incredible speed with which Drosten got his report in. What did his report say, and why do you think that occurred? Why do you think there was it was super green lit or green lighted, however you'd say that?
So it was in, I think, December 2019 when the Chinese government was publishing these video clips of people laying on the streets shaking like this, if you remember them. And they said like, oh, they're dying from COVID. So this was their proof that there is a virus going on. We know that this proof, of course, that it proved because nobody else in the world was like shaking or like falling over on the street.
Yeah,
and even
I've never figured out who made those videos. What was the purpose of that? And how did people so gullibly swallow that? I think a lot of people still have not thought about it.
I think it's the Chinese Communist Party PSYOP together with the WEF and other big players. So at least they published these videos, and they they couldn't justify this in Europe because nobody here would like fall over on the streets like that. So what they needed in Europe and the rest of the world would be a test to show that you're ill even though you're not ill. So I think this is why this protocol was created.
Right. So to get to that point, so this was a green light for the PCR, the COVID PCR test.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe you could elaborate for our audience that may not be as literate or cognizant of this topic. What's the point here? What was? Do you think that the test is accurate, inaccurate? That there was coronavirus, not coronavirus? I mean, for my own case, just as a background, coronavirus, they've been around as long as mankind, coronaviruses, and they, prior to 2003 would be just seen as the second leading named cause of the common cold. So coronaviruses are no big deal. I mean, we learned about them in medical school back when, when I was there when dinosaurs were around. So coronaviruses were nothing novel. But there's this whole level of fear attached to them. So what is exactly the problem with Drosten's point? Is that it's inaccurate test? It was too sensitive, or it's finding cases where there's not really disease, or that's finding coronavirus in the regular population, such as coronaviruses have always been, or were you really working on the technicality that it shouldn't have gotten into a journal that fast? I mean, which of those aspects am I getting more?
Yeah, all of them. So first of all, he got the sequences from a social media platform.
He got the sequences.
Yes, from a social media platform. Based on that, he and his buddy Olfert Land, he's like the owner, or he was an owner of a Berlin startup who now sold the startup for several billions, I think. They created this PCR test literally overnight. At least this is what Olfert Land said. Overnight, we created this PCR test. given the information we have now, that also a Slovene laboratory tested the test beginning of January 2020, and they stated that they have done in-depth test, that they have tested this in depth via quite a period of time. We can assume that the test was already finished before Christmas 2019. So why would Drosten create a test prior to these Chinese CCP videos that were published? So that doesn't make any sense. In addition, his protocol was advocating for a cycle threshold of 45, which is so high.
Huge. That's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
That's finding.
It's making everybody sick.
Yeah, it's almost like I could sit here and get a piece of Mars atmosphere.
Yeah,
I mean, it's each cycle is an order of magnitude, is 10 times more sensitive. So 10 to the 45th. I mean, these are. It's not quite exactly like that, but if you had I don't know a meter and 10 to the 45th meter, I think that would put you out of our solar system to the next star practically. No, I don't know. I have to figure that out. But anyway, so the more cycles you do, the higher that cycle number is, the less of a signal there has to be in actuality for you to have found it. And potentially there's the higher risk of false signals. Yes, no?
Yes. So I assume that the majority of outcomes were false positives.
Right. So what cycle number did they ultimately wind up? I thought it was in the 30s, like 37.
35, I think.
35.
Which is still way too high.
Yeah, it's still
way too high.
Yeah. And I, just again, as background for our audience, if you test anything in an audience that is not likely to have that problem, you will have more false positives when the background likelihood is low. So the example I use, I wrote an article on Bayes' theorem during COVID, which I thought might take off. It didn't. That you're going to get a lot of false positives as we enter into and then leave the quote unquote pandemic, whatever it is, because you're going to be over testing for audiences or recipients that are not that sick. So the example I used for that was if you are a bomb tester, if you work in, Michigan in 1970, in a small town airport where people are doing commuter, and you're the bomb tester. You're going to go through a lot of people getting on and off airplanes and never find a bomb. And so any test you actually find positive, given the audience, that very low likelihood bomb carriers, there's going to be a false positive almost always. Conversely, if you're in Baghdad airport in 2004, something like that, and you're the bomb tester, you're going to have a higher likelihood. When your test is positive, it's more likely to be an actual positive because there are more people carrying bombs theoretically. I don't know if that's a good example. You could make 18 other examples. I had one, if you're testing for real plants in New York City indoors, there are more false plants and there are going to be more false positives versus going into the jungle and testing for plants. So anyway, that's Bayes' theorem. And so when you're testing at this high sensitivity, enormously high, and you're finding something that exists in the natural environment as a coronavirus, and there are other coronaviruses that are not this SARS-CoV-2, as it wasn't called at the time yet. It's fraught with the possibility that you are just dead wrong.
Yeah, we also wrote a paper on Bayes' theorem and false positives, and we figured out in the Netherlands it was up to 90% false positive during the summer. So
great minds think alike, I guess, huh?
Yes. But ours got published, I think, last year.
I got mine published, but I couldn't get it published in any major journal. So I got it into an American Thinker, and it didn't change the world, but it's still apt. And it's frankly apt now because Senator Dick Durbin, who's from Illinois, U.S. Senator, Democrat, he actually has the exact identical post that he had from maybe 2-3 years ago. I just came down with COVID-19. I'm going to be quarantining, blah, 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 so forth. And because my test came out positive, whatever. right now, I mean, I think this actually proves the fact that this test still turns positive when it's Omicron, which is not a lineal descendant of SARS-CoV-2. I mean, I will stipulate the early Greek letter alpha, beta, and there's probably gamma, delta, kappa, all the lambda, all the relatively early Greek letter variant strains, the VOCs, variants of concern. Those were lineal descendants, nieces and nephews, grandkids, whatever, of SARS-CoV-2. But Omicron is not. Omicron is like some other, spontaneous coronavirus, or what we call the common cold coronavirus. And the fact that people can still turn positive for it, I think belies the fact that this test is not that precise for this particular pathogen, SARS, or the Wuhan flu, whatever you want to call it.
And we shouldn't forget that all these variants are solely a computer model. We shouldn't forget this. So it's highly theoretical.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean they're computer model?
Well, if they take a sample, for example, of a sick person, they don't isolate the virus and then run the sequencing on this. They run the sequencing on whatever protein is in the sample. So it's very hard to determine whether all these variants are actually variants and whether it's what it is. So I'm very skeptical towards that. But maybe we shouldn't get into the virus topic at all.
Let's go back to I have you on the thread reader, so let's go follow your thread where we last left off in our conversation. You pointed this out, that this was an incredible speed with which this paper could pass through quote unquote peer review. Unlike,
yes.
I mean, maybe there were some peers, but they weren't necessarily peering at his paper and nor reviewing it very much.
There wasn't even peer review. It didn't take place. So when the paper was submitted, so it was submitted somewhere at night, and it was published online the next day. All right. Mm-hmm. So I could even track back when it was published, when it was sent at night, because they cited a WHO publication which wasn't put on the website, I think until at night that day. So they took this the same day, and afterwards they submitted it. So that's why I could get it down to I think it was 8:30 at night when they submitted it. So this is the earliest. So they would have taken the publication of the WHO, added to the document, and right away submitted it. And the next day it went through peer review, obviously iterations to independent reviewers, and got to the typesetter, got forth and back, and then they published it. But there is no way that first of all the editor finds two reviewers and that they review the paper at night, and then do iterations during the day, and then even the typesetter, who usually needs several days, gets this online. So it's impossible. It's just simply impossible to reduce a process that takes 3 months until 2 years down to 3.5 till 27.5 hours. It's impossible.
So where does this leave us? I mean, where did that leave you at that moment?
Well, I know that this is a fraud, and Drosten kept on being a frontman, at least in Europe. He kept on slandering people like those from the Great Barrington Declaration. He was always calling them pseudoscientists. He was blaming everybody who had a different opinion. He even had clips where he said, hey, if there are people who said they have a different opinion, don't trust them. Don't trust other professors. Don't trust other doctors. Just trust me. And I think he's a bought asset. The only question is who pays him or who blackmails him. Why does he do it? What else is he hiding from us? But I know that actually literally everything he said since the beginning were lies. So he even said there is no seasonality in viruses, or there is no seasonality in being ill. He predicted 3 summers in a row that the peak would be during June, northern atmosphere, hemisphere, sorry. And yeah, everything he predicted was wrong. Let's put it like this. He also predicted people in Africa will be piled up on the streets. They will die in being piled up. And also it didn't happen, because I mean, like, African people don't have a TV, or like they have a TV. Sorry, not African people watching, but like, I mean, like, per 100 of people, less people have a TV or have less media than in the Western culture. So they were less exposed to propaganda, which is, in my opinion, why less people died, because less fear, less panic, less cortisol, less excess mortality. And I think they know this. They know all that. But of course, I mean, like, they have to lie. Otherwise, the card house is collapsing more rapidly.
So where did Drosten land? Has the virus, the pandemic, has not been good to a lot of people. How was it for him ultimately?
I know his buddy Olfert Land. He's a billionaire now. Drosten, I think he must have gotten money, but we are still looking for it. I can't find anything. So he has fame, but I mean, like, now he's hiding.
He was not asked to leave his job.
No, of course not. He's getting all the money now. He gets research money. It's everything he wants. Of course, he didn't have to leave his job. He did everything wrong. All his statements online were wrong. Everything was wrong. Everything was the opposite of what he actually should have said.
Okay, so we have your word for this, and I'll play devil's advocate. Who are you, and how would you know this, and how can you say that with assertion? And who believes you, and who doesn't believe him?
Yeah, well, the opposite is, like, the thing is, I lost all my money I had, all my jobs I had, and he gained everything. And I think my predictions were quite correct, especially with vitamin D. And also now, as we're looking into the data now regarding the vaccine injuries, and also the I call it the fear-demic, we can see the higher the measures, the higher the fear, the more the excess mortality. So I like to let the numbers speak, and I think the numbers prove me right, and Drosten totally wrong.
Is this are there, how is he seen kind of in mainline science or in Germany? And do you feel as if, well, as the facts prove us right, that there's going to be any change in overall consensus?
No, he's a demigod still. People love him to death. I think the majority of people. So you have now this Minister of Health, Karl Lauterbach, who's also fraud. And his whole CV was obviously a lie. His whole CV, imagine. Professor, doctor, whatever. And they're now investigating this, and I think they're gonna focus on him. So the focus will not be on Drosten. So Drosten left Twitter, I think it was 1 year ago. He knows why. He knows exactly why. When the tables were turning, the tides were changing. Mm-hmm. He was just like leaving as if nothing ever happened. But of course, I mean, like, he's been telling, I think, in an interview that he wanted to do some camping holidays during the weekend. And when he arrived at the camping site, people were literally attacking him. So he has enemies, and he should be put in front of a court. He should face a trial for what he did. I mean, the evidence is there, but still the judiciary system isn't ready yet, I think.
So what's your work now? What happened? Well, let's just stick on with that question. You say you're in Sao Paulo. What's your work now? What's your pathway? And how does one set the world right? And how does one prevent kind of this rush to judgment?
So what is my work now? So after I lost the job, I got a job in Norway with the same money that I generated, because it involved several partners in Europe. And that job I lost in January. again, because my Twitter got reinstated in December, and in January.
Well, this year?
This year I got fired again.
Are you serious?
This year, because many people were complaining about what I was saying, and it still contains some self-censorship. So I got fired this year.
Did they give you a reason? Did they give you a reason?
Well, no, nothing written. No. on Skype, they said external communication. So it's going to court now. This is going to court because what should I say? External communication is quite clear. Yes, but they didn't give me any written reason. They want me now to sign a mutual agreement that I'm leaving voluntarily, stuff like that. So it's like, that's what they do if they don't have any arguments. But as I lost the Norwegian job, so Jeffrey Tucker was welcoming me with open arms at Brownstone, where I got some financial support. It's far from what I earned before, but there's some financial support. And meanwhile, I started my startup, Sunfluencer.com. So Sunfluencer, where I'm selling vitamin D in the best available form.
I'll put that up for people to look at. And how's life in Brazil?
Yeah, life in Brazil is great. It's summer, so I cannot complain. But it's kind of sad that I can't enter academia anymore in the near future. So this is something I'm struggling with, and I never wanted to have a web shop. But at least I'm trying to do something good, and use my position in order to educate people. So that's what I'm trying to do on Substack, on my website, on the Sunfluencer blog, on Twitter, Telegram. So trying to educate them regarding vitamin D, nutrition, omega-3. So this is the website. And I try to come up with a product that contains everything that you require. So I think this is the best thing I could do, being an independent scientist. And there's nothing better than selling stuff and helping people at the same time. So this was my thought.
Right.
But
I agree. So that's just the people who can't see this. It's Sunfluencer, like influence, but Sunfluencer.
Yeah.
.com. So I assume you're recommending this in 2020. Was this? I live in the United States, and there were a lot of the erstwhile proposed temporizing solutions, shouted down. So I see this kind of as an argumentation between parents and children. Now, I don't want to get too personal here, but I was a child once. The audience might be shocked given my advanced age, but I was a kid once, and I remember there was a dawning moment when I was a kid when I was like, my mom's not always right. She said X and whatever, and I think we were going down the street someplace, and she was making a wrong turn. I'm like, no, we have to go that way. And she's like, yeah, you're a kid, shut up. She was sweet, but basically it was like, it was a bunch of things like that. I remember this moment. I'm not sure what age I was, 7 or 8. I was like, no, whatever. And I felt like I had some validity for thinking what I was thinking. But the answer was invariably, shut up, you're a kid. I feel like, in a way, this has been the argumentation that's gone on. And during the 2020 year of our lockdowns here, and to a large extent, which were crazy, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, whatever that is. There was not that much curve to flatten, except maybe New York City, but the rest of the country wasn't having this problem at all. We were flattening curves. Omaha, Milwaukee, Chicago, they didn't need their curves or anything else flattened. But there was no vaccine around. And in the meanwhile, there's the right to try. And we literally have a bill from 2018, the right to try for, terminal cancer patients, the right to try something which hasn't been approved. And in this case, there were potential, side effects or side benefits of medications that were out there. HCQ, I'm not necessarily endorsing these per se medically, but HCQ was a possibility. It was an FDA-approved drug for something else. Ivermectin was an FDA-approved drug for something else. And frankly, a kind of an antibiotic of sorts, with known antiviral, anti-lysosomal properties from prior investigation. In fact, and I always mention that the guy who invented it won the Nobel Prize. And so this was, an acceptable thing. And medicine's always had the possibility of secondary use. There's two different hair medications. Both of them were secondary discoveries. Minoxidil and finasteride both had other, primary uses. When they grow
Viagra as well. Huh?
Yeah, Viagra is, all Cialis, all stuff. Viagra and Cialis were created as anti-anginal medications. And so, oh my God, I'm fixing my heart, and boom. And the world changed. I mean, in a counterfactual world, somebody posited that if Viagra had been, invented in 1920, there would be no World War II. Hitler would have been sexually satisfied, and he wouldn't have taken his, kind of puerile aggressions out on the world based out of sexual frustration. That's what the psychoanalyst. Anyway,
he only had one ball. So let's tell the audience.
That's actually enough. I mean, you can get by with zero if you have testosterone as far as having a sex life. Anyway, leaving that aside, and I'm not sure with what validity we can state that one ball theory, but I have heard it. But the fact of the matter is that secondary use is a thing, and you were proposing the vitamin D and whatnot in Europe. So here, these things were not pushed at all. Everything seemed to be like funneling down to keeping people, like as the prison word, locked down, in anticipation of this great coming of the vaccine. That was going to, frankly, I couldn't wait for the vaccine, not for the vaccine, but for the fact that's like, would they just get off our case? And everything else we said, getting back to my parent analogy, everything that we said was shut up. So what about this HCQ? It's reasonably safe. It's worked on this and this and this, malaria, whatever. I don't know. Shut up. What about the ivermectin? I mean, it's harmless. Shut up. And
Brindle, it even gets worse. So there's this website. It's called Vitamin D Meta. It's HCQ Meta. It's ivermectin Meta. It's like meta-analysis of all studies existing on vitamin D, HCQ, ivermectin, on COVID. And the scientists, which are retired professors, who made this website, were all banned from Twitter. And even the website itself, exactly. So it was just meta-analysis. It was a scientific meta-analysis of everything that existed. So there were positive and negative results put together. So it wasn't just like, take vitamin D. No, it was super, super, super rational and objective. And it all got centered on Twitter. Even I was banned for a week for posting a link to them.
Yeah, so this is the shut up theory of science.
It's a shut theory, exactly. They're silencing the truth.
Right.
They were.
So they're the parents, and you're the the child, and you might be right, you might be wrong, but in point of fact, I'm the parent, you're the child, so shut up. It's like I don't really care right now. I'm not listening. Shut up. And the parents can get away with that. They have all the power. They drive you around. You don't have any rights. You can't vote. You can't move out. You can't get an apartment. You don't have credit cards. All that kind of stuff. And that seems to be the way of things. Like this is like the parental rule of rule. That it's about power and control. And again, parenting actually is not all that. I've been, I'm still a parent, but apparently I'm not parenting as much as I was when my kids were younger. They're adults right now. So, but even parenting is not that, because you can't just say shut up endlessly to your kids, because your kids will hate you. A, B, they get older, and then they'll hate you even more. And C, they're your kids and you love them. I don't see any of that. So to call it a parental relationship is actually not apt. It's more of a dictatorial relationship, or an abusive relationship, or a sadistic relationship. The Marquis de Sade, has his own internal rationale, which is complete. Forgetting the lurid parts of sadism, the Marquis de Sade was a thinker of sorts, and he felt that other people, in a sense of, in a kind of a godless way, his pleasure, he's the only one experiencing the world. And his pleasure is paramount, and who the bleep cares about the other person's pain if it gives me pleasure. And so this is, I'm in debt to Andrew Clavin for this, analogy, but he points out that the world has become somewhat autistic as a culture, and is not listening, and is not picking up social cues, and is sadistic as well, in the sense that if certain people are getting pleasure, then other people don't matter. And that
Hey, I'm autistic. I am.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I think there's a so-called spectrum. I think you're reasonably perceptive. I think that everybody has some aspect of everything, and you are able to adapt. You're not, you're pointing things out. You're rational.
Exactly.
Your words make sense. I've read your pieces, and you're forthright, and so the world needs some of that. And to call it autistic, I think is reductionist. And maybe that's your diagnosis. I don't know. But be that as it may, that kind of takes away from the whole kind of the social contract we theoretically have, where the people who lead us are technically at our service, when I don't think they necessarily realize that, or have to put up with it, or care.
Yeah, and they act like it's the other way around. They are just like mandating us to do stuff. They are like pushing us to just follow their agenda, to just follow their message. So we've seen this a lot on social media. Those who don't agree with the narrative, they get silenced, and they get silenced from all directions. So be this an employer, be this the government itself, be this the big tech companies, the banks, and everything. So I think the last 2 years were the worst, and I think it's getting better, especially with Elon Musk taking over Twitter. But that was indeed a big issue.
Who's also, he self-proclaimed, I think, autistic, but
he is. Yes, I'm not self-proclaimed.
I'm not saying he is necessarily self-proclaimed either. He announced it.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
So I know we're gonna end shortly. We're at minute 42 right now. I'm wondering what your summary of all this is. What are your next steps? What is your message for people?
So my next personal steps, there's one rule I have. It's like, don't hate, because if I hate, the hate like eats. I like calling out people who are part of it, and we shouldn't make the same mistake as in 45. That we let everybody get away with what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important that those who did this to us will be brought to justice, but in a way that is fair. I'm not like they're like hating them. I'm just trying to not forget, because people tend to forget, and the next thing is going to come. Climate lockdowns will come, social credit systems, CO2 credits, and the same people will be on board again and discriminate against us. So I don't want to forget what happened, because I suffered a lot from what happened. I'm still suffering, although I try to be positive.
I agree. I'm going to say that 3-4 times. There's been a lot of suffering. Doesn't measure up with yours. But on a personal basis, we had all kinds of schism, fractures, factions amongst the community. Long-term friends we've had for decades, became kind of almost like the Salem witch trials. People would, or maybe better yet, invasion. I don't know if you ever saw the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And people look like people, but some of them had been, kind of subsumed by these body snatchers, aliens. And anyway, it became like that when they see that you're a denier, which I think is an epithet. It's a curse in a way. They point and scream, and that happened here. People, again, they've been at our parties and Thanksgiving and all kinds of events and birthdays and weddings for decades, and then because you didn't like triple mask or whatever, they're like they're screaming at you. We played tennis in an indoor pavilion, which is about, I don't know, I'll stick with feet, 30, 40 feet high. And somebody posted it on Facebook, and that person, that women can be cruel to each other, and she was like, ousted and outed by all her friends, and they wouldn't talk with her for months because she had played tennis indoors. I mean, it's like, oh my God. Anyway, there's stuff like that, and various. I'm belong to a number of social groups. I have a congregation, an athletic club, investor group. And in each of those groups, I was that guy. I was kind of mini you in each of those groups, and I, saying what I think. And I thought it was all, kind of a bad cold, I guess, for some people. But everybody else, we all somehow survived this, apocalypse. And but I was literally screamed at. I was accosted. I mean, varying, depending on how you define assault. I was assaulted at various points, not punched or anything like that. Because I was saying what is, seen today is the absolute truth. But it's a funny time. Anyway, I'm going to, I appreciate what you're saying. I think those are reasonable words. So I think we're going to end very shortly, but I always leave my own shameless self-promotion. I like to tell everybody that I have a book out. It helps fuel this, my endeavors here as a video podcast or whatever. And try to bring the truth out to you. So my book is on the last great pandemic. Overturning Zika, the book, is the pandemic that never was. And you can buy it on Amazon. It's coming out in Brazil in a Portuguese version. So Simon, you can buy one there, but you got to learn Portuguese first.
I speak Portuguese.
Oh, you do? Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
You're a step ahead. So I tell people it's got my self-portrait here. This is not my most flattering. This is me early in the morning, but they did spell my name right, so I'm happy about that. So please buy this book, and you don't have to read it, but you do have to buy it. If possible, leave a review and try to find out the truth. There are very, a lot of similar elements, the way the propaganda was, and the way things spread, and the way the disease was worse in the places that people really heard all these horrible stories. So people react. We're not computers. We have emotions, and we react to fear, and we can be motivated and guided by fear or misguided by fear. So I think it's a crucial message. I thank you so much, Simon, for coming on. We can hang around for 2 seconds after we leave, but we're going to say goodbye to everybody else unless you have some final words of inspiration.
Buy Rendell's book.
All right. That's excellent. And buy Simon's Sunfluencer. He is the Sunfluencer for all of us. He's the solar energy behind our best motivation. So please follow him. He's on Twitter. I think I might have posted his Twitter feed, but you can find him. Just copy his name down. You'll find him easy enough. Thank you so much, everybody. Replicate this, share it, clone it, send it virally. And there's no vaccine against us. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.